Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is the 4th part of What If Issei Was Broken Beyond Repair. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like the video, and also share this video with your friends. Let's start the video. Issei was sitting on the couch of the living room with his arms crossed and his eye closed. He opened it slightly and saw what was happening in the room. Rias was playing a game of chess with Akino, Asia watching them. Kiba was pacing back and forth, swinging his sword. He was wearing arm bracelets and shin bracelets to protect himself in the raiding game. And Kaneko was sitting next to Issei on the couch, licking a lollipop. Suddenly, there was someone knocking at the door. The door opened and in the room stepped Sona and her queen, Tsubaki. Sona. Why are you here? Rias asked. I also came here to watch the raiding game between you and Riser. Sona said. Also. Who else is going to be watching? Rias asked. Before Sona could answer, a red magic circle appeared from the floor. Out of it, came Grafia. Rias, there's only 10 minutes before the match starts. Are you all prepared? Grafia asked. Everyone nodded. When it is time for the battle to begin, you will be teleported to the battlefield via magic circle. You'll be going to a different dimension that is only used for raiding games. With that, you'll be allowed to fight with your full power. Grafia said. Everyone nodded at what Grafia said. Rias, I see you won't be using your other bishop. Sona said. Issei and Asia raised their brows. They didn't know that Rias had another bishop. They both turned their heads and looked at Rias. Yes, unfortunately he's still too powerful for me to control. We will talk about him when the time is right. Rias said. Everyone nodded. I should also probably state that both the Phoenix clan and the Grimoire clan will be watching this raiding game. The Mao will also be watching, so remember that. Grafia said. Rias and her peerage's eyes widened when they heard what Grafia said. Mao. My brother is going to be watching the raiding game. Rias asked in shock. Issei raised another brow in confusion. He remembered Riser say that Rias' brother left the Grimoire clan, so he presumed that he also left the underworld. Kiba saw his confused expression and decided to answer to his confusion. Issei, Ria's brother is the Mao of the underworld. In the Great War, the Maos were all in very critical condition and it caused their deaths. That's why the devils let the 4 strongest inherit the name of Mao. Ria's brother is the most powerful Mao. Kiba explained to Issei. Issei nodded, understanding. Issei then looked at the clock that was on the wall, as did Grafia. It was time. Everyone, it's time for the raiding game to begin. Please step on the magic circle. Grafia said. Everyone stepped on the magic circle like Grafia instructed them. Remember, you can't use magic circles once you enter the battlefield. Use them once the game officially ends. Grafia stated one final rule. Everyone once again nodded. Issei cracked his knuckles and his neck. He was feeling pretty pumped. At the battlefield arena, once they got teleported, Issei looked at his surroundings. He was again confused. They were still at the old school building. Hello, everyone and welcome to the match. I am the maid, Grafia, and I will be the announcer for this raiding game. Grafia's voice was heard. Issei then understood that they weren't in the real world. They were in a replica. We have used both Rias and Riser's opinion on a certain battlefield and we have created the high school that Rias goes to in the human world, Kuo Academy. The 2 teams have been separated to both their respected bases. Ria's base is the Occult Research Club room at the old school building and Riser's base is the Student Council room at the newer building. Grafia said. Issei, will you please put this transceiver in your ear? Everyone is already wearing one. Akino said with a smile, giving Issei the transceiver. The transceiver is going to be used so we can communicate with each other. Rias explained the use. Issei nodded. I believe that it's time for the raiding game to officially begin. The game will continue until dawn in human time. Let the game begin. Grafia said, starting the game. Ring ring ring, the school bell went off, signaling the start. Issei headed for the door. He was really fired up. Issei, please wait a moment. We have to come up with a good plan in order to take down Riser. Rias said, sitting down in the chair behind the desk. Issei gave a long sigh and walked back to where everyone was. He doesn't like to wait when he knows enemies are close. Okay everyone, we have to take down Riser's pawns first. If he manages to promote them to queens, then we'll be in trouble. Rias said with her arms crossed. She was serious mode right now. Since the battlefield is of the academy, we have a small advantage in hiding spots, setting up traps and a few shortcuts. Yuto, did you do what I told you a few days ago? Rias asked. Yes, Rias. Yuto said, placing on the desk a map of the entire school. As you can see, there's a forest here. I think it's safe to assume that it's our territory, since it's close to our base. Though we should probably keep up our guards if we enter Riser's territory. They might put traps in a few places, so be careful. Rias warned her peerage and Issei. Rias, shouldn't we send someone to the gym first? If we manage to capture the gym, then we will have access to both new and old buildings. We could also restrain the enemy's movements. Kiba said. Rias smiled and nodded at Kiba's plan. I agree with that plan, Yuto. We capture the gym first. If I'm correct, then Riser is going to place a rook in there with maybe 2 pawns. And since it's inside a building, it's better to use a rook with a very destructive ability than a knight with mobility. Rias said with 2 fingers on her chin. Yuto, Kaneko, take the map with you and put traps in the forest. Mark the places that you place the traps. Rias instructed. The knight and rook nodded silently, taking the map and leaving the room. Everyone else, stand by here for now. Ah, Akano. Rias said. Yes, Rias. Akano asked with her usual smile. Once Yuto and Kaneko come back, can you cast a few illusions and some mist around the forest and sky? Rias asked her queen. Akano nodded. The plan has begun. Issei looked down at his hand and saw that there was a small green glow on it. Issei transformed his right hand into the gauntlet. Issei, does Didrag want to say something? Rias asked with a raised brow. Issei nodded. Rias Grimori. Can I ask you an important question? Didrag asked. Rias nodded. Back when I had my own body, I managed to do a bit of a research on the Phoenix clan. Have you come up with a way to counter their use of the Phoenix tears? Because if you didn't, then you will be in a bit of trouble. Didrag said. Rias widened her eyes a bit and bit her thumb in disappointment. Darn, I forgot one of the most important things about the Phoenixes. And to think I prepared for this game well. Rias muttered in disappointment. Let me ask you this, Rias Grimori. If you had any Phoenix tears with you, who would you give them to? Didrag asked. Well, I would keep one for myself and give one to my queen. Why are you asking? Rias asked. Then that means Riser will also give one to his queen. The other one, he might give to his bishop. Didrag stated. So, you noticed that his bishop is also his sister. Rias said with a smile. I suspected that it was his sister, but you confirmed it now. So we should probably be a little bit wary of his queen and bishop. Didrag said. You don't have to worry about Ravel. She doesn't fight, she only stands in the sidelines. Rias said. Didrag said nothing. After that, they all fell into silence. Rias was drinking her tea, which was prepared by Akano, with Asia and Akano, and Issei was sitting on the sofa with his eye closed. Issei, can you come here for a moment? Issei heard Ria's voice. Issei opened his eye and stood up from the sofa. He walked towards Rias with a raised brow. Sit. I want to ask you something. Rias said. Issei nodded and sat down beside her. Issei, why have you decided to help me? You could have walked away from all of this. Why didn't you? Rias asked. Issei looked at her for a small moment. It's because he's in debt to you. You were the one that revived Asia, were you not? Didrag asked. Rias nodded. Then there you have it. This is his way of repaying you. He also thinks that you deserve a small light of hope in this raiding game. Didrag said. Rias just sat there with her eyes slightly wide. She suddenly pulled Issei in a tight hug, causing the latter to widen his eyes a bit at the sudden movement. Thank you, Issei, thank you so much. Rias said with a happy smile. Issei just patted her back awkwardly. Rias then let go of Issei once she saw that Kiba and Kaneko were now back. I see that you guys returned. Rias said, standing up. Kiba and Kaneko nodded. Alright, I will now set the teams. For now, Akano, you will stay here with me in Asia. Kiba and Kaneko, you will go to the basketball court. Issei, can you handle the gym all alone? Rias asked. Issei nodded while cracking his neck, making Rias smile. Outside the gym, Issei managed to walk to the gym without any problems. Once he reached the entrance door, he raised his left leg and kicked the door. The door flew back and hit the other side of the gym. Issei stepped inside and saw 4 girls from Riser's peerage. He recognized only Mira, because she was one of the members that he fought in the clubroom. He then saw her outfit consists of a navy blue kipa with gold accents, a white sash around her stomach, and black, low-heeled shoes. The kipa is open at the chest area, giving view to her breasts and cleavage. She also wears black armguards over her forearms. She does not wear any undergarments. She is also very well-endowed young woman of Chinese descent with shoulder-length black hair and blue-green eyes. Her hair has two Chinese-style buns on both sides of her head, while the front features bangs that form a slight V shape across her forehead. Issei then turned his attention to the two young girls with turquoise hair, which they keep tied to one side of their head with a yellow ribbon, and blue eyes. Both of their outfits consist of gym uniforms, which consist of white t-shirts with blue accents, black leggings, and blue sneakers over knee-high socks, similar to the Kuo Academy's girls' gym uniforms, albeit without the logo. They also wear an orange wristband on their right wrist. They seem to be carrying two different colored gym bags with something big inside. So, you were the person that Riser wanted us to look out for. You honestly don't look like much. The Chinese girl said with a smirk. This caused Issei to glare at her, which she ignored. You will pay for humiliating me in front of Riser and my friends. Mira shouted as she grabbed her stick and dashed at Issei, shouting. Issei sighed. She was making the same mistake again. Before she could strike him, he parried her stick, just like last time. She managed to keep her balance this time, causing her to smirk. I was training very hard. I won't go out that Issel arg. Mira was cut off when Issei planted his knee deep in her stomach. She fell to her knees, barely breathing from the powerful blow. She began to glow a blue color, before disappearing. Riser's pawn, retired. Grafia announced. Foolish girl. Hasn't she heard of the phrase, to speak in battle is a sin? Diedrag said out loud. The three girls narrowed their eyes at Issei. The two young girls opened their bags and pulled out two chainsaws. Let's split him in two. One said with a bloodthirsty grin. Yay, split, 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 just like piñata. The other one said with the same kind of grin. Issei couldn't help but sweat drop at the two girls. Your guard is down. Issei heard the Chinese girl shout. He raised his hand and blocked her incoming punch with ease. One of the twins was running at him with her chainsaw from the right, while the other was running at him from the left. Once they were close enough, Issei jumped away from them to the other side of the room. This almost caused the two to collide with each other. Almost. The rook dashed at him once more, throwing punches. Issei was dodging all of her attacks. He suddenly sidestepped to the right once she threw a right punch. He grabbed her arm and gave a downwards elbow on top of her own elbow, causing it to break. He wasn't done though. He grabbed her from the back of her head and pulled her downwards, delivering two knees to her stomach. He then jumped and elbowed her on the top of her head, causing her to fall to the floor. She didn't retire though. Issei then turned his attention at the twins. He took a step back once he saw one of them almost cut his face with the chainsaw. Before she could recover, Issei punched her with his right hand, sending her to the floor. He turned his attention to the other twin. He dashed towards her. Once he was close, he disappeared. The pawn's eyes widened. She was forcibly turned around and was grabbed by the neck by none other than Issei. He lifted her up, choking her and causing her to drop her chainsaw. Issei then slammed her to the ground and put his other hand on her neck and began to choke her. She was trying to kick and punch him, but her efforts were weak. Her eyes slowly rolled to the back of her head as she let her hands fall to the side. Issei removed his hands once he saw her unconscious. Her body began to glow blue as she also disappeared. Riser's 3 pawns and 1 knight, retired. Grafia announced. Issei made a grunting noise. Kaneko and Kiba are doing very well. Issei then turned his attention at the rook. He saw her slowly standing up, holding her right arm. She was gritting her teeth in pain. Issei dashed towards her and kneed her in the stomach, causing her to spit blood. She fell to her knees while spitting blood. Issei then grabbed her head and kneed her in the face. Once she fell to the ground, she disappeared in blue particles. Riser's rook, retired. Ria's rook, retired. Grafia announced. The announcement made Issei narrow his eyes a bit. So, Kaneko has been taken out. Issei left the gym and headed towards the basketball court. Basketball court. Kiba blocked an attack from Riser's other knight, Carlamine. He was alone now, because Riser's rook, Isabella took out Kaneko while she was fighting Riser's two pawns, Ni and Li. Once Kaneko finished with the two cat girls, Isabella stroked from behind. You are pretty good, Knight of Grimoire. Carlomagné said as she backed away. Kiba smiled a little at the enemy's praise. Thank you. You are very good as well. Kiba said. Come on Carlomagné, finish this duel already. Isabella said impatiently. Isabella is a woman with short, light brown hair and gray eyes. Her hair has 3 red highlights across, and wears a plain white mask which covers the right side of her face. Her outfit consists of a black jacket and matching jeans. The jacket has wide shoulders and a wide collar, and features 3 leather straps on both her arms. It is also slightly open, revealing her rather large breasts and cleavage, and it is cut off at her midriff. Her jeans have a section on her right pant leg cut off, revealing some of her thighs and butt, and also feature 3 leather straps on her calves, just below the ankles, and 2 extra straps on her right pant leg to keep it in place. She also wears black fighting gloves and boots to enhance her blows. Carlomagné sighed. You guys never let me have my fun, do you? Carlomagné said, annoyed. Just finish this duel. Isabella finished with a sigh. After Isabella said that, Carlomagné's sword was lit up with fire. Kiba looks at her sword with a bit of surprise in his eyes. That surprise soon disappeared, causing Kiba to smile. Very nice. But I also have a little surprise for you. This isn't everything to my sacred gear. Here, allow me to show you. Kiba said with a smile. Carlomagné stayed silent, but was staring at the knight with interest. Freeze. Kiba whispered. This caused the sword he was holding to be covered with ice. The ice soon began to break, revealing a blue blade with frost covering it. Now, I hate to break the bad news to you, but this sword deletes all types of fire. Don't believe me. Go on and try to strike me with your flame sword. Kiba said with a smile. No. You have to be lying. And I'll prove it right now. Carlomagné shouted. Carlomagné sprinted at Kiba and clashed her flaming sword with his icy one. This caused Carlomagné's flames to die down as her sword was covered with ice. She backed away from Kiba once she realized what happened to her weapon. Once she got at a safe distance, her sword shattered. She grabbed a smaller sword that was settling to her thigh. She held her sword up high. I am a member of the House of Phoenix. We rule over the fire and the wind. Whirlwind of fire. Carlomagné shouted as the basketball court was covered in a wind of fire. Carlomagné, be careful with that. You have allies here as well, you know. Isabella shouted. So, this is how you want to win. By trying to burn us alive. Again, I'm gonna have to disappoint you. Kiba said, the smile never leaving his face. Kiba took a deep breath and extended his sword forward, which was dripping slightly with water because of the high temperature. Kiba swung his sword to the left and with that, the storm of fire that surrounded the basketball court got absorbed into Kiba's sword. Kiba smiled. I'm impressed. It has been a while for me to have summoned 2 demonic swords. Kiba said. This is very interesting. Are you able to steal other people's sacred gears and use them as our own? Carlomagné asked with a hand to her chin, her anger disappearing. No, I do not steal other people's sacred gears. I simply create them. Kiba said. I'm sorry, but I don't think I follow. Carlomagné said, titling her head to the side in confusion. My sacred gear's name is Sword Birth. As you have already witnessed, it allows me to create any type of demonic sword. That's its true ability. Here, let me show you. Kiba explained. Kiba then raised his hand that was holding the ice sword, the tip of the blade looking downwards. When he did that, multiple swords appeared from beneath the ground, many having different shapes and colors. Carlomagné smirks a little after seeing what Kiba did. A demonic sword wielder is a great fortune. It appears that it's destiny that I keep meeting swordsmen with unique and special swords. Carlomagné said. Kiba raised a curious brow. This is getting interesting. Wait, you met another person like me? One who uses demonic swords? Kiba asked. Not exactly, the person was wielding a holy sword. Carlomagné reviled. This caused Kiba's expression to darken. Carlomagné feels a chill running up and down her spine as she felt killing intent spilling out of Kiba. I'm going to ask you this once and you'd better answer me, who is this holy sword wielder? Kiba asked in a low yet very cold voice. You appear to have some sort of a connection with that holy sword wielder. But instead of answering you with words, I will answer to you with my sword. Carlomene shouted as she sprinted at Kiba with her sword raised. Kiba said nothing and raised his ice sword, covering half of his face with it. Suddenly, a red light passed Kiba and was headed towards Carlomene. Her eyes widened. She didn't have time to block the red blast, so she closed her eyes as she felt pain engulf her body. Once the red light was gone, Carlomene was laying on her side, her armor destroyed. She was also burnt a little, since she had a few black spots on her skin. Her body was soon covered with a blue light. It then dissolved. Riser's knight has retired. Graphia announced. Kiba stood there wide-eyed. He slowly turned around and saw the man responsible for the attack. It was Issei. His right hand that was covered in the Red Dragon Emperor's gauntlet was raised forwards. 3 of his fingers were held up, the other 2 closed tight. Once Issei saw the knight disappeared, he lowered his hand to his sides and looked at the remaining enemies with half-closed eyes. Issei, Kiba muttered. Another one of Grimory's servants. Marion, Sharia, attack him. I'll take care of the knight. Isabella shouted as she charged at Kiba, Marion and Sharia charging at Issei. Issei also charged at the 2 pawns. Once he was close, he suddenly slowed down, confusing the other 2. He roundhouse kicked Marion in the stomach, causing her to vomit blood and spit. The kick was powerful enough to send her all the way to where she came from, which was the left side of the basketball court. She hit the pole that supported the basket. Her body was covered in a blue light. She disappeared shortly. Riser's pawn, retired. Graphia announced. Issei then turned his attention towards the remaining pawn, Shadia. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her mouth open in shock. Issei could already smell her fear. He slowly started to approach her as she started to walk backwards. Master Riser. Retire me, please. Sharia began to shout with her eyes closed. Issei could even see a few tears dropping down her face. Her wish was granted though. She was soon covered in the blue light, disappearing in a matter of seconds. Riser has retired 1 pawn. Graphia then announced. Issei then turned his attention towards Kiba and Isabella. The fight between them was tight. Isabella was using her strength and high defense, so that Kiba couldn't get too close, but if he did, then she would black it. Kiba was using his high speed to his advantage. Issei calmly walked over to where the 2 were fighting. Kiba and Isabella backed away from each other, trying to catch their breath. Once Kiba turned around, he gave a small smile. Ah, so you have already finished your fight with the 2 other pawns. Kiba said. Issei didn't say anything. Issei, Rias talked to me while I was fighting with this rook. Akano is making her way over here. She is going to use her lightning to try and take out some of them. Once she tells us, we will jump out of the way. Understood. Kiba explained the plan to Issei. Issei nodded this time. So, do you want to fight her? Or should I fight her? Kiba asked. Issei responded by walking in front of Kiba with his hands inside his pockets. Alright then. I need a breather, Kiba said, stabbing the ground with his sword. Issei was the one to start, by disappearing. Isabella only smirked. She has faced people who did this trick one too many times before. She turned around and swung a fist. Her instincts were correct, because she managed to hit Issei in the nose. Issei put one hand to his nose and saw that it was bleeding. Isabella, seeing Issei distracted, sprinted towards Issei, ready to deliver one more punch. Issei suddenly transformed his right hand into the boosted gear, charging an attack. Once Isabella was close enough, Issei opened the palm of his right hand and let the blast escape his palm. Dragon shot. Ddrake's voice was heard shouting. The red blast fully engulfed Isabella. Once the blast cleared fully, Isabella was nowhere to be seen. Riser's rook has retired. Graphia announced. Issei let the gauntlet disappear from his right arm, using the same one to wipe his nose of the blood. Once he was sure that his nose was not bleeding, he put his hand back into his pocket and walked towards Kiba. Good job Issei. That was fairly quick, Kiba said with a smile. Issei nodded and turned to look at the remaining servants. There were only 2 girls left. One of them wore a kimono and had black hair with gray eyes. The other one was wearing an outfit consisting of a light purple dress with dark purple accents and a blue bow at the front. At the back, 3 feather-like extensions mimicking a bird's tail protrude from the dress, which, when combined with her wings of fire, give her a bird-like appearance. She also had blonde hair and blue eyes. Issei narrowed his eyes at the two girls, his eyes then widened when he heard an explosion coming from behind him. He turned around and saw a pile of smoke coming from inside a crater, which was where Kiba was standing. Issei managed to see a blue light, before it disappeared in a matter of seconds. Ria's knight has retired, Grafia announced. Issei looked up and saw a woman. He remembered her easily. She was the woman that Riser was kissing and fondling in the clubroom. Also known as Ubeluna. She smirked down at Issei. So you were the one that took down most of our members. I have to say that I'm a bit impressed. But will you be enough to handle me? Ubeluna said as she threw fireball at Issei. Issei raised his left hand, grabbed the fireball with his hand. The fireball exploded with a loud boom. Ha 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 ha. You really are a fool. Did you really expect to catch my fireballs that easily? Ubeluna asked with a smirk. Right when she was about to turn around, she saw a pair of red wings coming out of the smoke. Once it cleared, Ubeluna saw Issei standing still. His left hand was still raised, though the sleeve of his shirt was torn. So it appears that you're stronger than you look. No matter. I'll handle you properly this time. Ubeluna said, the smirk never leaving her face. Just as Issei was about to attack, he felt someone shout at his ear. Issei stand a bit back. I'm about to use my lightning. Issei recognized the voice of Akeno. Issei jumped at the other side of the basketball court. He watched as Ubeluna put on a confused look. She was then struck by lightning, sending her down on the stone ground. Once the bright yellow lightning stopped striking, there was nothing left but a giant crater at the center of the basketball court. Issei once again looked up and saw Akeno with her left hand raised and a smile on her face. Issei flapped his dragon wings and flew towards her. Once he flew to where Akeno was, Akeno smiled and said, I'm sorry for being late, Issei. But I think it's going to be best if we both return to Rias. Akeno said as she turned her back. And where, do you both think, you're going? We haven't finished just yet. A female voice was heard. Akeno and Issei turned their heads around and saw Ubeluna slowly ascending from the crater. Blood covered her lips and forehead. Her clothes were also a bit burnt. She had a few burnt marks on her legs and feet. Oh my, still alive. Guess I'm gonna have to strike you down once more. Akeno said as she raised her left hand once more. Ubeluna then took out a small red object from in between her breasts. Issei looked at the small object curiously. Partner, that bottle has phoenix tears inside. Grab it. It might help us when we are injured. Didrag said inside Issei's head. Issei disappeared quickly and reappeared in front of Ubeluna. Akeno slightly lowered her left hand as she saw Issei's actions. Ubeluna was staring at Issei with an expression containing shock and a little bit of fear. Issei then grabbed her right hand forcibly, causing her palm to open. He grabbed the phoenix tears from her hand and put it inside his pocket. He let go of Ubeluna's hand and turned around. Hey. That's mine. Ubeluna shouted. She reached out and grabbed Issei's right arm. Issei turned around and punched her in the face, sending her down in the crater once more. Issei approached Akeno and nodded at her. Akeno understood what he meant and nodded back. She once again raised her left hand. Yellow lightning covered the basketball court. Once Akeno finished with her attack, she licked her fingers with a seductive smile. Ah, that was satisfying. Let's go, Issei. Akeno said as they both made their way towards the clubroom. Riser's queen and bishop have retired. Grafia announced. Upon reaching the clubroom, Akeno widened her eyes. She saw Rias on top of the roof, her clothes torn and a few burnt marks on her face. Riser was also there, a smirk on his face. Riser then disappeared in his own flames and reappeared behind Asia. He grabbed Asia by her arm and lifted her up. Asia began to whimper in fear and pain. Issei widened his eyes at Riser's actions. He began to shake with rage as the only thing that he saw was now red. Issei flew at Riser as fast as he could. Once Issei was close, he punched Riser in the face, sending him behind the clubroom. He has also let go of Asia's hand. Issei. He heard Rias shout. But he ignored her. He jumped down to where Riser was and walked towards him. Riser quickly recovered from Issei's attack. He burst through his own flames and grabbed Issei's face. He threw Issei with all his power inside the old school building. Issei went through 2 walls and stopped once he was back outside. He quickly stood up, but Riser punched him in the face. Issei managed to stay on his feet. Issei clenched his left hand and tried to punch Riser. Riser dodged and covered his left knee in flames. Riser lifted his knee, but it was blocked by Issei's elbow. This caused Riser to flinch a bit in pain. Issei noticed Riser being distracted with pain and managed to land a punch on Riser's face. Riser stumbled a bit, but quickly recovered. He then covered his hands in flames and threw fire at Issei. Issei raised his hands and blocked the flames from reaching his face. Riser then sprinted forwards and sidestepped to the left. He lifted his knee and hit Issei in the stomach. Issei spit blood, but managed to back away in order to catch his breath. Kid, I have to say that this battle is pretty much tied at the moment, but I have to warn you that I am done playing games. This is where I get serious. Riser shouted as was engulfed in his own flames. Issei instantly put his guard on. Riser was quickly in front of Issei. Issei blocked an incoming punch by crossing his arms in an X shape. The punch though sends Issei a few feet back, but he was still standing. Issei leaned a bit back, managing to dodge a hook from Riser, though Riser managed to punch him with his right hand while Issei was still leaned back. Issei fell to his knees, but quickly stood back up. Before he could put his guard up once more, Riser kicked him in the stomach. While Issei was clenching his stomach, Riser again punched him in the face. Issei fell to the ground as Riser stood on top of him. Riser then started to punch him in the face, his hands covered in fire. Issei kicked Riser off, sending him a few feet back. Issei stood back up, though with a bit of difficulty. Issei dashed towards Riser and speared him. Issei repeatedly punched Riser in the face, and then Riser rolled him over, punching him several times, before getting kicked off by Issei. Both men were now panting from tiredness. Riser then reached for his pocket and pulled out a small red bottle. Issei immediately recognized the small bottle as a bottle of Phoenix Tears. Thank Mao, I told Revel to give me her Phoenix Tears. Once I drink this, all of my injuries will be healed and you will lose. Riser said with a smirk. Issei then pulled out his own Phoenix Tears as he watched Riser's eyes widen in shock. Where did you manage to get that? Riser asked, though already knowing the answer. Issei didn't say anything as he opened the bottle and drank the Phoenix Tears. That's how Phoenix Tears are used, right? If not, tell me in the reviews and I'll try to fix it whenever I can. Riser scoffed, but drank his own Phoenix Tears as well. Once they were both done, they threw the empty bottle to the ground. The small bottle broke easily. Riser's flames intensified. Issei then manifested his boosted gear in his right arm. He closed his eyes and let power flow through his body. A powerful crimson-red aura engulfed Issei as his boosted gear's green emerald began to glow. Boost, 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 boost. D-Drake's voice was heard from the boosted gear. The red aura continued to intensify as the ground began to shake. Riser was watching Issei with shock and interest. Issei's body then started to grow a bit larger and a bit more masculine. His eyes started to glow green and his wings extended. He was slowly engulfed in a red armor. Once the aura cleared, Issei was completely covered in the red armor. Boost. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker. D-Drake's voice was heard once more. The green eyes took a bright glow. Issei looked up at Riser, who had the same expression on his face. After a few seconds, Riser smirked. Ah, I see this is going to get even more interesting. Let's see how powerful you have become now that you have entered Balance Breaker. Riser shouted as he intensified his flames. Issei also began to intensify his red aura. The both dashed at each other, punching each other's hands. A small crater was created while sparks of electricity were coming out of their clenched fists. Issei backed away and disappeared before his feet touched the ground. Riser turned around and blocked a fist from Issei. Issei then again disappeared and reappeared next to him. Before Riser could react, Issei uppercutted Riser, sending him flying in the air. Riser did a backflip and extended his own wings, which were now covered in fire. Riser covered his hand in flames and threw a firebolt at Issei. Issei backhanded the firebolt away from him. His eyes widened behind his mask as he saw that he accidentally deflected the fireball towards Rias. Rias and Akino raised their hands and formed a shield. The fireball hit the shield, breaking it instantly, but leaving the two girls unharmed. Issei gave a small sigh of relief. He turned towards Riser, though he was surprised when Riser punched him in the face, shattering the red mask that covered his face. Issei also did a backflip and extended his wings, causing him to hover in the air. Riser looked at Issei with a smirk. Let me ask you a question, kid. Why is it that you don't speak? Are you afraid? You have a problem with your voice. Or is it possibly a traumatic experience, possibly involving those scars? Riser asked Issei with a look that said, I know everything. Issei's eyes widened. Riser knew. Riser knew all about the whole thing. Issei, with anger in his eyes, dashed at Riser with amazing speed. Riser's eyes widened, not expecting the amazing burst of speed. Issei punched Riser, who blocked the attack, but was sent down to the floor. He was still standing though. Issei again used his great speed and tried to punch Riser again, who blocked the attack just barely. Partner, it's time to use that. Ddrag said inside Issei's head. Issei removed the armor from his leg and dug into his pocket. He pulled out yet another small bottle, though this one was white instead of red. Issei opened the bottle and splashed what looked like water on Riser's face. Ah! Riser began to scream as he felt the water burn his skin. This was no actual water. It was holy water. Flashback. Do you have any holy water with you? Ddrag asked the former maiden. Why yes, I have some with me. Why do you ask? Asia asked. It's because I'm forming a plan that is going to help us defeat Riser. Devils are weak against holy water, correct? Ddrag asked. Asia nodded. Riser is a devil. We use the holy water on him. Then, if my theory is correct, we also splash some holy water on the boosted gear, to see if it has any effect. Now Asia, go get the holy water. Do not tell anyone about this. Ddrag said. Asia again nodded and went to get the holy water. After a few minutes, she came back holding a small bottle. I brought the holy water. She said with a smile. Issei also gave a small smile. He patted her on the head, causing her to blush and smile more. Very good. Now partner, use a few drops on the boosted gear. Once you do, boost a few times and we'll see what happens. Ddrag said. Issei nodded and grabbed the bottle from Asia's hands. He opened it and let a few drops on his boosted gear. Boost, 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 boost. Ddrag shouted. Suddenly, the boosted gear began to glow white. It started to change color, changing into an orange color. Then it changed into a pink color. Then into a yellow color. It changed into all the colors of the rainbow and some that weren't in the rainbow. Wow, Asia said as she stared at the boosted gear in shock and awe. So it seems that we have a good plan in order to take down Riser. But in order to take him down, we are going to have to weaken him. The real question is, are you ready, partner? Because if you are not, you will lose your life. Ddrag said to his partner. Issei only nodded with determination in his eyes. End of flashback. Ah. Where the hell did you get holy water? Riser asked, the holy water still burning his skin. Neither Ddrag nor Issei answered him. Issei then did what he did before. He splashed all the holy water that was in the bottle on his boosted gear. Boost, 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 boost. Ddrag shouted. The boosted gear began to glow in a mixture of colors once more. Issei dashed towards Riser and punched him in the stomach with his boosted gear. This caused Riser to spit out blood. He grabbed his stomach and took a few steps back, leaning forwards. He then fell to his knees, still in pain. Issei then punched him in the face with his boosted gear, sending him to the ground. Issei full-mounted Riser and began to punch him over and over again with his boosted gear, which was still glowing into a mixture of colors. Please stop. Please don't kill my brother. A voice said which was coming from behind Issei. Issei slightly turned his head and looked at the person responsible for the words. He saw the same girl that he saw when he was fighting that girl, Isabella. The one with the blonde hair and the blue eyes, also known as Revel Phoenix, Riser's little sister. Issei ignored Revel and continued to punch Riser. He managed to punch Riser 2 more times, before he felt someone cling to his waist. He turned and looked down. He saw Revel hugging him tightly. Please, please don't kill my brother. Please, Revel pleaded in a shaky voice, tears spilling down her blue eyes. Issei felt his rage die down and his eyes also softened a bit. He lowered his arms down and his boosted gear gained its normal crimson color. Brother, please, just surrender, it's not worth it anymore, Revel said. Riser was still lying there, not moving at all. He wasn't even regenerating his wounds. Brother, please, say something. Say something. Revel shouted. Riser then managed to open his eyes and looked at his sister. He then muttered something that only Revel and Issei heard. I surrender. Riser managed to say. Riser's and Revel's body began to glow in a bright blue light. After a few seconds, they both disappeared. Riser has surrendered. Rias Grimori is the winner of the rating game. Grafia announced. Issei was then teleported to another area. He was in another room. The room had a giant glass window with a few couches. Near the couches were Sona and Tsubaki. Next to them were two other people. One had long red hair and green emerald eyes just like Ria's. The other was a woman, who had long black hair and pigtails. She also had pink eyes, just like Sona's. Issei. You did it. Issei then felt someone hug him tightly from behind. He also felt two giant melons sticking to his back. Issei, I'm so proud of you. You managed to defeat Riser. Akino hugged his left arm. I knew you were strong, Issei. Asia said, hugging his right arm with a happy smile. Issei then started to walk forwards, slowly and a little woozy. He was also breathing heavily. Issei, are you okay? Rias asked with concern as she walked up to Issei. Issei ignored her and continued to walk forwards, his steps becoming even woozier. Issei, what's wrong? Rias shouted, her worries growing. Issei looked at the people in the room, before falling face first on the floor, unconscious. Issei. Rias, Asia and Akino shouted as they ran towards the fallen Issei. Issei groaned as he slowly opened his eye. His vision was a bit hazy and the bright light that was shining on top of him did not help things at all. After a short while, his vision was fully restored. Issei looked around the room that he was in. He was in a hospital room. White walls with a bit of blue mixed in, white metal floor. There were two windows at the right side of the room, giving a view of the outside. There were 3 chairs in the room, 2 of them being occupied by Rias and Akino, who were asleep. There were 2 stands that had red flowers in vases. There was also a door in the corner, which Issei guessed that it was a bathroom. Issei sat up on the bed and rubbed his left eye with a yawn. He was extremely tired and his body was a little sore. Partner, you're awake. He heard Didrag say. Issei nodded. You were asleep for about 5 hours. After the rating game, you passed out due to using balance breaker. Since this was the first time you used it, it's pretty normal for you to pass out. Balance breaker uses your stamina mostly. But, if you train enough, then you might stay in balance breaker for a pretty long time, maybe even months. Didrag said. Issei again nodded. He was going to have to train a bit more if he wanted to stay in balance breaker for a longer period of time. Issei put his naked feet on the cold floor and stood up. He was a bit wobbly, but he managed to walk to the bathroom. He opened the door and entered. After finishing his bath, he exited the bathroom and walked back to his bed. As he sat down, he saw Rias stir a bit. She slowly opened her eyes, only for them to go wide once she saw Issei was awake. Issei, Issei. She shouted as she jumped and hugged him. Issei just stood still, awkwardly hugging her back. Issei, you made me very worried. For you to suddenly pass out like that, please, never do that again. Rias said as she pulled back, tears in her eyes. Rias then smiled as she began to close the distance between her and Issei. His eyes widened as Rias kissed him on the lips. It wasn't deep, but it was full of love. She pulled away with a smile. That was my first kiss. It's what every girl treasures. It's also your reward for ending my engagement with Razor. Thank you very much, Issei. Rias said. Issei just sat there with his mouth a bit open and his eyes wide. He just got kissed by a girl that he barely knew. He knew her for about 2 weeks and she just kissed him on the lips. Issei just sighed. He was too tired to think about it. My Rias. You stepped up your game, I see. Issei then heard a female voice. He looked behind Rias and saw that Akino was awake and was staring at them with a smile on her face. Akino. How long have you been awake for? Rias asked as she blushed. When you shouted Issei's name and you jumped on him. Akino said, still smiling. Rias just stood there a bit embarrassed. The door then opened and in stepped the rest of Rias' peerage. You're finally awake, Issei. Gave us quite a scare there. Kiba said with a smile. Issei. Asia shouted as she also jumped and hugged him. Issei smiled at the blonde girl and hugged her back, patting her head. Kaneko was standing next to Kiba silently, but she also had a smile on her face. Another man then entered the room. It was the same man that he saw in the room that he was before he passed out. He had shoulder-length red hair and his eyes were the same color as Ria's. He looked at Issei with a smile. So, you're Issei Hyodo. Rias has told me a lot about you. My name is Searsex Lucifer. Glad to meet you, Issei Hyodo. Searsex said with a smile as he extended his hand. Issei looked at him for a small while. He slowly extended his hand as well and they shook hands. Brother, what are you doing here? Rias asked. I just came here to see Issei. You don't mind if I call you Issei, right? Searsex asked. Issei only nodded, saying that he didn't mind. I'm glad. As I was saying, I came here to see how Issei was doing and to congratulate him on his victory over Riser. Congratulations Issei. The fight between the two of you was pretty interesting to say the least. Searsex said with a smile. Issei only nodded. Big brother, is that all that you have come here to say? Rias asked. Ah, yes. I almost forgot. Issei, how would you feel if Rias moved in with you? Searsex asked. Issei was surprised by that question. He looked at Rias and saw that she was a little nervous on what his answer will be. Hello, Lucifer. Didrag spoke out of Issei's right hand. Hello, Red Dragon Emperor Didrag. Searsex responded. My partner does not mind if Rias Grimoire moves in with him, but there might be a problem. Didrag said, causing everyone in the room to raise their brows. Oh. And what problem are we dealing with? Searsex asked. Well, to put it simply, there are fallen angels living at my partner's house. Didrag said, causing everyone in the room to widen their eyes. Do you mean the fallen angels that you took when you left the church after saving Asia? Rias asked. Rias, did you know about this? Searsex asked as he looked at his little sister. I only knew that he took them with him. I didn't know that he spared them. Rias said. I see. Issei, why did you take the fallen angels with you? And why did you spare them? Searsex asked. It's because we wanted to interrogate them. After they told us everything that we wanted to know, we spared them as promised. One of them, Calawarner, said that she didn't want to go back to that church. So, we let them stay. And so far, they haven't done much wrong. So, I wanted to offer something. Didrag said, gaining everyone's interest. What do you propose, Red Dragon Emperor? Searsex asked. This is going to be more in the lines of an experiment. Rias Grimoire will move in with my partner. The fallen angels will also stay under the same roof. If things go well, then we might be looking to put an end to the hate between the three factions. But, if things don't go as well, then the one who causes the most problems in our house will have to move out. How does that sound? Do you accept Rias Grimoire? Didrag asked Rias. Rias put a hand on her chin, thinking about that offer. She wanted to stay with Issei, but to have the enemy this close to her, is going to be a problem. Rias, do you want to stay with Issei? Searsex asked. Yes, I do. Rias answered truthfully. Then I see no problem in you participating in this small experiment. I also want to end the hate between the factions. This might be a good opportunity. Searsex said with a smile. Alright big brother. I'll take part in the experiment. Issei, I hope that you take good care of me. Rias said with a smile as she bowed. Issei nodded slowly. Looks like things are about to get even Levier in his house and life. Wait. I also want to move in with Issei. Asia shouted with a red face. Everyone besides Searsex was shocked at Asia's words. I think that can be arranged. I was looking for a house for you, so Issei's house is the perfect fit. But, won't it be bothersome to live under the same roof with the fallen angels that killed you? Rias asked. Well, it is going to be a bit weird living in the same house with your killers. But I think that we can all start fresh. And if they try anything, then I'm sure that Issei and the rest of you will protect me, right? Asia asked. Everyone in the room nodded as Issei patted Asia on the head, earning a happy smile from the ex-nun. Then it's settled. Me and Asia are moving in with you Issei. I hope you take care of both of us. Rias said again as she bowed. Again. See partner. Your life is slowly, but surely getting more fun. You would make these girls very sad if you ended your own life. Don't always think about yourself. Didrag said inside Issei's head. Issei then looked at the two girls. They were both happy that they were going to move in with Issei. But, he made a promise to his dead family. Once he gets his revenge, he's going to join them. And no one will be able to change his mind. He, that's right, once you get revenge, end your life. It's the smartest thing that you'll be doing in your pathetic life anyway, the voice said. Issei flinched at the voice's choice of words. Though the others didn't notice. But he agreed with the voice on some degree. It is going to be the smartest thing he'll ever do. After Issei and the others got released from the Underworld's hospital, Graphia took them back to the clubroom of the old school building via magic circle. Once she teleported away, Issei and Rias gathered Asia's belongings from the clubroom. Once that was done, they walked to Issei's house. Once they reached Issei's house, Issei took out his key and unlocked the door. Ah, kid, your ba devils. What are they doing here? Kalawarner asked, scared as she summoned a light spear. Mittelt also wore the same expression as she also summoned a light spear. Calm down, the both of you. Put away your light spears. We'll explain why these devils are here. And one of these devils, you are quite familiar with. Ddraig said. Issei then stepped to the side a bit, revealing Asia. Asia. You're alive. How? Mittelt asked, shocked. I was the one who revived her. She is now one of my servants. Rias said with her eyes narrowed. Everyone, let's all calm down. Let's talk as to why the devils are here and what I and my partner want from all of you. Ddraig said. Everyone nodded and walked to the living room. Issei sat in the middle of the big sofa, Rias and Asia sitting next to him. The two fallen angels sat on the other side. Now, the reason that the two devils are here is because they are moving in with us. Ddraig said. What? Both Mittelt and Kalawarner shouted. Let me finish. The reason that Asia is moving in, is because she has nowhere else to stay. And as for Rias Grimori, she just wants to stay close to my partner. Are you two with me so far? Ddraig asked. The fallen angels nodded silently. Good. Another reason is that my partner and I want to end this hate between the three factions. So, that's why we came up with this little experiment. We will let you, as well as the devils, stay in our household. If things do work out, then we might be one step closer to achieving peace. But, if things don't go as planned, then the ones that are causing the most trouble here will have to move out. Are we clear? Because let's face it, I don't think that Azazel wants to start a war. He was the first one that retreated in the Great War after all. Ddraig said. The two fallen looked at each other. They then looked back at Issei. Well, I think we can agree. We'll try and get along with the devils. Mittelt said. Very good. And I think that this experiment will start very well if you both apologize to Asia right now. Ddraig said. The two fallen looked at the blonde girl that was fidgeting around in her sit. Asia. We both want to apologize for killing you. Though I doubt that you'll forgive us, we still want you to know that we're very sorry. Kalawarner said, Mittelt agreeing with her. No, it's alright. I forgive the both of you. Asia said with a smile. The two fallen smiled in relief. It just occurred to me. Kalawarner, Mittelt who gave you the order to kill my partner? Ddraig asked. Well, Azazel wanted us to keep you alive and watch you from the distance, but then we got a change of order from Kokabil, saying that Azazel said to kill you. Kalawarner said. Issei narrowed his eyes at the two fallen. Ah, I suspected as much. Kokabil became fearful once he found out that I revived my partner and that I was his sacred gear. So he lied to you in order to avoid any obstacles towards his goal. Ddraig said. How are you so sure about this? Rias asked. Because from what I have come to know, Azazel is not someone that likes war. He is more interested in sacred gears. Kokabil is the one that likes war. Ddraig said. Now that you say that, I did hear Kokabil cursing Azazel a few times from retreating from the war. Mittelt said. I see, Rias said with a hand on her chin. Silence fell on them. Issei then stood up and yawned. Well, we are off to bed. Good night everyone. Ddraig said as Issei made his way up the stairs. He heard the girls reply good night. Issei took a quick shower and brushed his teeth. He was now wearing a sleeveless white shirt and boxers. Issei once again yawned as he entered his bedroom. He lied down on his bed and looked at the ceiling. He now had 4 girls that moved in his house. Just as Ddraig said, his life is getting more and more levier. That it is partner. That it is. Ddrag said inside Issei's head. It was also the last thing that Issei heard before letting sleep consume him. Issei opened his eye and looked at the ceiling for a small while. He tried to get up from his bed, but there was some weight on his right arm. Issei looked to his right and saw Rias. On his bed. Naked and sleeping peacefully. Issei just gave a quiet sigh. What was wrong with this girl? He managed to free his arm from Ria's grasp without waking her. He exited his room and walked to the bathroom. He gave 2 knocks on the door. It's occupied. A voice said from inside the bathroom. Issei recognized the voice of Mittelt. Issei went downstairs, yawning a bit. Once he got in the kitchen, he saw Asia making breakfast with a smile. Asia noticed him coming down the stairs and looked at him, her smile widening a bit. Ah, good morning Issei. Breakfast will be done shortly, she said as she went back to cooking. Issei gave her a small nod and walked inside the living room, where he saw Kalawarner watching TV. Issei sat across her waited for Asia to finish cooking breakfast. Kalawarner snapped out of her daze when she saw Issei sitting across her. Morning kid. Didn't notice you there. Kalawarner said with a smile on her daze. Issei looked at her and nodded back at her, his own way of saying good morning. He then turned his attention back to the TV. Issei, why did you sneak out on me? And why didn't you wake me up? Issei then heard a voice behind him. He was also hugged from behind as he felt his head sink in a pair of big breasts. The owner of the voice was Rias, if you haven't figured that out by now. Issei could only sigh at the girl's actions. It was way too early in the morning for this. Breakfast's ready, Asia said from the kitchen. Rias let go of Issei and walked to the kitchen, Kalawarner and Issei following behind. Mittelt was also there and she already had her food in front of her. Once everyone sat down, they dug in. Breakfast consisted of miso soup, bread and fish. Asia, your cooking is the best. Mittelt said with a big smile on her face. I agree, your cooking is very good. Kalawarner said as she took a bite from her bread. Thank you Mittelt, Kalawarner. Asia said with a small blush. Once they finished breakfast, they put their plates in the sink. Rias, Issei and Asia went upstairs. Issei had time to take a quick shower. Once he finished his shower, he went back in his room and changed into his school clothes. Issei went downstairs and saw Rias and Asia waiting for him near the door. Well, we're leaving. Goodbye, Asia said as she exited the house with Issei and Rias. They heard Mittelt and Kalawarner say their goodbyes. Issei then closed the door. Hey partner, can I talk to you about something? Ddrag said inside Issei's head. Issei mentally nodded. Last night, I had a dream. It was more of a vision actually. Anyway, I saw you fighting with Kokobile in what looked like the school that you go to, Kuo Academy. Then, the picture started to change and I saw you beginning to transform into Juggernaut Drive. Remember when we talked about the technique? Ddrag asked. Issei again mentally nodded. If you remember, I told you that Juggernaut Drive can only be triggered if the host has any negative emotions, like anger for example. What I'm getting at is this, try not to lose your cool during your fight with the crow. Ddrag said as his voice faded away. Issei nodded again, though he didn't think that he'll be able to contain his rage when the time comes. Before they knew it, they reached the entrance of the school. Once they passed through the gate, they were automatically showered with shouts from both female and male students. Why is Hyodo with Princess Rias and Asia? A female student asked in shock. Hyodo, you bastard. Get away from them, you monster. A male student shouted in anger. Ah, I wanted to date Issei. Another female voice said in disappointment. Issei's left eye began to twitch. He was once again the center of attention. Hyodo Ubastard. Two voices were heard. Issei looked to his right and saw the perverted duo, Motohama and Matsuda running at him with fists raised and anger across their face. Issei sighed. He didn't have time for this. Issei dodged a punch from Motohama and kicked his left leg, making him lose his balance and fall to the ground. Matsuda threw his punch at Issei, who stopped the punch with his hand. Issei then pulled him down and swipe-kicked Matsuda, causing him to have the same outcome like his comrade. How the hell are you too strong? Matsuda asked with gritted teeth. Issei just shrugged his shoulders. Before he could walk away, he felt someone tap his shoulder 2 times. He turned around and saw Rias. Issei, I have to go to my class now. Let's meet up in the clubhouse. Rias said with a smile. Issei only nodded. Oh, just to let you know, Asia is in the same class as you. So take care of her. Rias said with a smile as she walked away. Issei nodded and looked at Asia. Issei mentioned for Asia to follow him. Asia complied and began to follow Issei. Once they entered their classroom, they sat on their chairs and waited for the bell to ring, which did after a few seconds. After about a minute, Mrs. Keiko walked in the classroom. She had a few books in hand. Good morning, class. Today, we'll be continuing our session on Greek mythology, so open your history books on page 57. Mrs. Keiko said as she opened her own book. The students did the same thing. Issei opened his book, but he didn't pay any attention to the lesson. He just stared out the window. His eyes then narrowed. Outside were two strangers. One of them had something big wrapped around in a cloth which was on her back. The other had a sword strapped around the hip or thigh. Issei couldn't tell the gender of the ones with the giant thing on her back, but he knew that the other one was a woman, because he could see her long brown pigtails at the side of her hood. He couldn't identify the other person though, but he gave a wild guess that it was a woman as well. Issei, can you please pay attention to the lesson? Mrs. Keiko shouted. Issei turned to look at her for a small moment. Once she turned around to write something on the whiteboard, he turned and looked outside once more. Though the two weren't there anymore. Issei gave a quiet sigh, as he looked towards the whiteboard, so he could write whatever Mrs. Keiko wrote. Lunchtime. The bell finally rang, signaling lunchtime. Issei stood up from his chair and walked towards Asia's desk. Asia saw him walking towards her and smiled. Issei, are you going to the old school building? Asia asked. Issei nodded. Okay, then let's go. Asia said, as she and Issei walked out of the classroom. Once they got to the old school building, Issei noticed Asia flinch a bit. Issei turned and looked at her with a raised brow. Don't worry, it's nothing. I just felt weird for a moment there. Asia said. Issei nodded slowly. They walked up the stairs and headed to the main office. Once they got there, Issei gave 2 knocks on the door. Excuse me for a moment. Whoever it is, can you please come back later? We have some rather important business to do. They both heard Ria's voice say. President, why do you want us to leave? Asia asked with a stutter. Oh, it's just you, Asia. It's okay, you can enter. Ria said. Issei pushed the door open. His eyes narrowed when he saw who was sitting at the sofa on the right. It was the 2 strangers from this morning. They had their hoods down, so Issei could clearly see their faces. One of them had brown hair that was fixed in pigtails. She also had pink eyes. The other one, who was also a girl, had yellow eyes and blue hair, some green that covered the center of her forehead. She was also the one that was carrying that large thing on her back, which was on her side right now. Ah, Issei, you're with her as well. Rias said with a smile. Issei could tell that her smile was one of relief. Wait a minute, that is Issei. There's no way. He looks absolutely different from the last time I saw him. The girl with pink eyes said with shock in her voice. Irina, you should know that we shouldn't make friends with devils. The other girl said. I know Xenobia, but this is my childhood friend that we're talking about. The girl known as Irina said with a smile, causing the other girl, Xenobia, to sigh. Actually, Issei is not a devil. I offered him to become one, but he refused the offer. Rias said with closed eyes. Oh, thank God that you aren't a devil, Issei. Do you remember me? I used to be your neighbor 10 years ago. Irina said with a smile as she approached Issei. Issei looked at her confused. He put 2 fingers at the side of his forehead, but he couldn't remember a girl named Irina. Partner, I dug into your memory a bit. She is telling you the truth. She used to be your neighbor, but she had to move away due to her becoming an exorcist. Diedrag said inside Issei's head. Issei was still confused though, which weirded Diedrag a bit. Issei then felt Diedrag's eyes widen a bit. He then manifested the boosted gear on Issei's arm. So, it's starting. And here I though you would have a bit more time on you. Diedrag said out loud, causing everyone to look confused, except for Xenobia. The Red Dragon Emperor, was the only thing Xenobia said, but not from shock, but from interest. What do you mean, Red Dragon Emperor? What's happening to Issei? Rias asked worried. Remember when I told you about the illnesses that he had? One of them is starting to appear right now as we speak. Diedrag said. Wait, what kind of illnesses does Issei have? Asia asked. She was extremely worried. I also want to know. Irina said, as equally worried. Before Rias could answer, Didrag answered for her. He has some rare panic attacks, depression, extreme paranoia, dementia and schizophrenia. Didrag listed Issei's illnesses. Irina's eyes widened as a few tears escaped her eyes. She had a hand on her mouth as she took a few steps backwards. No, that can't be true, Irina said, falling to her knees. Asia was also sobbing as she hugged Issei, who remained with a confused look on his face, not paying any attention to his surroundings. I'm sorry to say, but it is unfortunately true. Didrag said. Everyone fell into silence after the reveal. What is the illness that just showed up then? Akino asked. That would be his dementia. Didrag said. Are you sure that it's his dementia? Are you sure that it's not just him forgetting about her? Rias asked, her face containing both shock and sadness. I am positive. Like I said, memory problems are one cause of dementia. He's experiencing one right now. And if you remember, after the rating game with Riser, my partner collapsed. In the beginning I thought it was from exhaustion. But I was wrong. Another symptom of dementia is the frequent falls, with the chance of passing out. I only said that he collapsed from using balance breaker as an excuse. Didrag revealed the real reason as to why Issei passed out after the rating game. Issei suddenly shook his head violently, causing everyone to look at him with worry. Once he stopped shaking his head, he looked at everyone in the room, his usual look appearing once more. Issei, do you have any idea as to what has happened to you right now? Rias asked. Issei looked at her for a moment, and then nodded his head slowly, his hair covering his eyes a bit. Are you going to be okay? I can call a doctor from the underworld if you want. Rias offered. Issei only shook his head. He then looked at Irina, who was still on her knees, crying. Issei walked towards her and put his arm on her shoulder, shaking it a bit. It caught Irina's attention as she looked up and stared into Issei's eyes. Issei, what happened to you? What happened to the boy I used to play with? What happened to the boy I used to share my laughter with? You are not him. Please, bring him back to me, please. Irina trailed off, but stopped as she hung her head lower and continued to cry. Issei then put his hand behind her neck and pulled her into a small hug. Irina continued to cry and sob. No one in the room dared to pull them apart. Not even Xenobia. This was the first time she saw her partner like this. She also felt a bit sad for her as well. Irina's eyes then snapped open as she pulled away from Issei, shock on her face. The others looked at her in confusion. Partner, you didn't just. Didrag began to say, but stopped. This was a big shock, even to him. What did Issei do? Rias asked with urgency. Neither Irina nor Didrag said anything. Issei patted Irina on the head and stood up. He walked towards Asia and stood beside her. Xenobia noticed Asia. It just occurred to me. Are you the witch, Asia Argento? The former holy priestess? Xenobia asked, causing Asia to flinch at being called a witch. Yes, it's me. Asia said with sad eyes. Don't worry, I won't tell the higher-ups that we saw you here. Though you did fall lower than any of us expected. For you to become a devil. Do you still believe in God? Xenobia asked. I did believe in him my whole life. I can't stop believing. Asia said. Is that so? Then allow me to cut you down with my holy sword, Durandal. Maybe God will forgive you and will allow you to enter heaven. Xenobia said as she unwrapped the giant sword from the cloth and pointed it towards Asia, who had a fearful expression on her face. Issei then approached Xenobia with rage in his eyes. How dare she say such words to Asia? Issei tried to punch her, but she jumped backwards. She proceeded to attack Issei, but Irina stood in front of her, her sword drawn out. Xenobia, please stop, we didn't come here to kill devils nor Issei. We came here to stop Kokobile. Irina said. Issei's eyes widened, his rage disappearing. Do you know where his base of operation is? Didrag asked. We still don't know that yet. We're planning on searching tomorrow. Why are you asking? Irina asked. Because it was Kokobile that caused every single one of my partner's scars. The one on his neck and the loss of his eye. It was all Kokobile's fault. He was also the cause of my partner's parents' death. Closing square bracket. Didrag said. Irina's eyes widened at the reveal. Kokubile was the one that caused Issei to be this way. Irina clenched her sword to her chest and gritted her teeth. Maybe, we can help each other. When you start searching tomorrow, we'll come with you. Diedreg said. We appreciate the offer, but we can't accept help from a devil. Xenobia said. Diedreg chuckled a bit. Didn't you hear what Rias Grimori said? My partner is not a devil. And even if he was, it wouldn't be help from a devil. It would be help from a dragon. Diedreg said. This caused Xenobia to put a hand on her chin. I haven't really thought about that. Alright, we will accept your help. Xenobia said with a smile. Irina also smiled, but she also had a few tears in her eyes. Red Dragon Emperor, are you sure that you want to ally yourself with exorcists? Rias asked. If it's for my partner to finally achieve his revenge and finally get his peace, then I'll do anything. Diedreg said. Rias stood still. She and her peerage knew what is going to happen if Issei gets his revenge. She still has time though. She can still change his mind. Alright, I trust you. Rias said. Before you two leave, mind if I have a spar with one of you? Kiba said with a smile, though everyone could feel the killing intent radiating from him. And who are you supposed to be? Xenobia asked. I'm your senior, though I was a failure. Kiba said with the same painted smile. That's it guys. Thank you for watching. And support the author as well for making this story.